Now, if you are new to the channel, new to Warcry, anything like that, basically when I do these kind of reviews, I do them also for start collecting boxes in AOS. Essentially what I do is I break down exactly what you get, what's in the box in terms of the number of units and that kind of stuff, and then we'll go unit by unit, in this case model by model in Warcry, and we'll talk about their skills and abilities, what they really bring to the table, and at the end of it, we'll bring it all together and ask ourselves, is this a good value, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of this set? The ultimate question, of course, always being, is this warband or starter box or whatever it is for you? There exists a city in Hysh, the Realm of Light, known as Noxseed. It's fair and beautiful, but it harbors a dark secret. In truth, much of the city has fallen to the twisted powers of chaos, though they remain hidden with this nice, perfect exterior so they go unnoticed. The real beating heart of this evil are the Cypher Lords, a massive cabal that views chaos as an undivided, ever-twisting, and maddening reality, to be worshipped and served. None exemplify this more than Archaon the Everchosen, and so the Cypher Lords will often deploy warbands into the 8 points, seeking the favor of Archaon and looking to become his spy masters across the realm. In general, their goal is to demonstrate their skill to the Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse by infiltrating his cities and even his own castle with these spy networks and eyes and ears, and to achieve this, they focus, of course, on deception, illusion, poison, mind-altering chemicals that can enslave and coerce, manipulate, and, of course, kill anyone that stands in their way. Side note, if you want to learn more about them, I really do suggest you pick up the Warcry short story, like, I don't know, compendium, whatever it was called, just called Warcry. The story that they put in there for the Corvus Cabal is top-notch. It's actually probably the best one in the book. And so with that out of the way, we're going to go unit by unit and talk about what you actually get in this starter set. Now, of course, in Warcry, you get all your models. They all have their own little profile cards. But in addition to that, you get one big card that has all the abilities for the faction. Rather than going through the abilities thing one by one, you know, later on, I'm going to basically integrate it and talk about it in context of those units. So if there's an ability that only affects the leader, I'll mention it when we talk about the leader. I think that'll kind of help steer the conversation in the right way rather than just having an info dump of units and an info dump of ability stuff. Now, inside the Cypher Lords box, you'll get 1 Thrall Master, 1 Luminate, 3 Mirror Blades, and 3 Mindbound. Now, for those last 2 units, the Mirror Blades and the Mindbound, they do have some weapon options, so you have a little bit of freedom when it comes to building. And one thing you'll notice very quickly is that a lot of these models look very, very similar to one another. There's not even a cohesion when it comes to their helmets or like that. I mean, they all have different styles. The easiest way to tell them apart is base size. So, your Luminate is obviously going to be the biggest guy. He's the leader, very easy to pick out. Next to him is going to be sorry, that's the Thrall Master as your leader. The Luminate is right next to him. It's the person always pointing the spear forward. And then you have 3 Mirror Blades, 1, 2, 3, and they are on 28mm bases, and then 3 Mindbound, 1, 2, 3, on 25s. So stepping back and kind of taking a look at what we get in the box, it's actually a pretty good mix of units. You don't have anything like the Iron Golems where a disproportionate amount of the warband is taken up by like a bruiser, the big ogroid guy. Instead, you get a leader, sort of like a lieutenant. The Luminate is a good second in command who can be a little bit more forward. You get 3 of the more elite troops and 3 basically just chumps who are there to die. The aesthetic is awesome. It was actually, aside from Mistweaver's side, it was one of our first glimpses of what Hysh would be like, and I think it really does hold up now that we've seen things like the Luminate Realm Lords and that kind of stuff. I think it looks absolutely wonderful. They're very dynamic in their poses. And I think the physical poses of them was important because there's no facial features. Everything's covered. And as we talk about abilities and stuff, you're going to see how they kind of factor in the light spy aspect, lightly armored, I should say, spy aspect, and how they basically do war, but specifically in a way that is about deception, illusion, movement, things like that. Now, pulling up the Cypher Lords card here, let me zoom in a smidge. We can do that. All right. I'm going to cover the universal abilities. They have 3 that I find very, very interesting. So the first one is a double. So I'm just going to assume you guys know how to play Warcry. If you don't, I have videos that will be coming out very soon about that. Essentially, if you have a double, throwing stars and chakrams. So basically you're going to pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of whoever's activating and roll 2 dice. For each roll of a 4 or 5, allocate 1 damage point to that fighter. For each roll of a 6, allocate the number of damage points equal to the value of this ability. So that basically means if you used a double 6 on this thing, and you rolled a 6 at that point, when you roll your 2 dice, it would count as 6 damage. Now, that sounds awesome. It does certainly have the potential to be really, really cool. The truth is, though, it's not very reliable. You're only doing damage half the time. You'll find out very, very soon that doubles and basically any combination of your ability dice are just kind of better well spent somewhere else. It's really nice to have in terms of, like, if there's just an annoying grot with 1 wound left, which has happened to me multiple times, where you just need something to put damage out and you don't have the time, or I guess should say like the action economy to like move over and hit them in melee. It is there. It's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not something that's very exciting. The next one here is Acrobatic Leap. Remember, anyone can use these, okay? This fighter can fly when making move actions until the end of their activation. However, when flying, they cannot move vertically upwards more than 3 inches. There are 2 massive uses for this. One is that it allows you to move over other enemies, okay? You can do a move action basically to get on the other side of an enemy, to hop onto an objective, that kind of stuff, because you can't launch yourself upward. It's not like you're completely ignoring vertical distance when it comes to up and down, like say many of the Corvus Cabal abilities allow you to do. Instead, this one's much more about engaging with models on your level, I should say. Now, it does say that you can't go more than 3 inches vertically upward. However, you can go downward. And so that's an interesting thing where you can do this acrobatic leap off of a raised structure and land where you need to go without taking any kind of damage. So that is really, really cool. Again, I think the real meat of this ability is that you can move over enemy units to get behind them, get behind their enemy lines, maybe break up some of their, or separate their forces a bit. So if you're playing one of those missions where you have to, like, you know, eliminate the opponent's dagger specifically, well, cutting the dagger off from the other parts of their warband is very beneficial, and this allows you to do that. The real theme that I'm getting at here is board control. We have it in spades. So let's move on here. And the last one here is actually a quad. It's all the way at the bottom. Remember, these are just the universal abilities. Spinning Somersault Strike. This fighter can fly when making move actions until the end of their activation. However, when flying, they cannot move vertically upwards more than 3 inches. Sounds very familiar. In addition, this fighter makes a bonus move action. Then, they make a bonus attack action. So it's the same thing, but better, right? Because now you're increasing action economy. So now, all of a sudden, your person who was just moving over to maybe secure an objective or hop over an enemy to split a unit is now actually able to land there and engage in a meaningful way. If you use the quad, for example, when you first select a fighter, because you can do it before their actions, you would have them move, which now they're flying, they get a bonus move, they get a bonus attack, and now you have your 2 actions, and if you're already in combat and that enemy is still alive, you can attack. And so that's an interesting thing. It's all about just knowing where you need to be. Again, a lot of this faction, as we're going to find out, is about board control. It's about having your models where they need to be. You have to play to objectives. And so now we're actually going to hop into a unit by unit thing, and we'll come back to these abilities as they become relevant. So here we are at the unit cards, and I do apologize for the glare. I had to find one online because my scanner stopped working randomly. But the only thing we're missing here is the points, and honestly, the points change, they get adjusted. I'm not too worried about that. The glare just kind of took out these 2 little points parts. But everything else we can read perfectly clearly. Now, we're going to start with the Thrall Master, right? We'll start here because his abilities really define this faction. And we'll give a nice summary here at the end, but his profile is actually pretty incredible for the base Warcry leaders. He can deliver some real hurt. 5 attacks, strength 4, 2's base, and then crits of a 6. That's incredible. That's awesome compared to some of the other ones. Like, I was surprised, you know, the Untamed Beast leader, he's not nearly as killy as I thought he would be, but this guy stands above and apart from the rest of his warband by delivering immense amounts of damage. One thing you'll notice across the board for every fighter here is a movement of 5. That's pretty great. And then the leader and the Luminate, which is his like second in command, have a toughness of 4. Everybody else is 3, but we'll get to them later. Now, what makes the Thrall Master so cool are his abilities, and I'll go ahead and bring those back up. He has access to 2. One of them, I'll get the kind of boring one, I think, out of the way, which is Shattered Gloom Globe. And I say it's boring, but hear me out. This thing is amazing. Until the end of the battle round, oh sorry, it's a triple, so it's a triple. Until the end of the battle round, subtract 1 from the attack's characteristic, to a minimum of 1, of attack actions made by enemy fighters while they are within 6 inches of this fighter. That's incredible. Like, I call it the boring one because you don't really want him to be like super close to combat, even though he's really good at it. He can hold his own. He's more of a late game thing. But the idea of subtracting 1 from the attack's value, what you're doing is, even if your opponent has bonus attack actions, you are essentially weakening them. You're kind of taking away some of the value of their abilities. Not to mention just their normal actions. Their attacks are significantly weaker. When it comes to some of the chumps and the lighter kind of units that you'll throw at various enemies, you know, thinking like the little spearmen from the Corvus Cabal or Grots or something like that, where, you know, their base damage is 1, but maybe their crit damage is 2 or 3, and they're relying on all these attacks to, you know, just sheer weight of dice get number 6. Essentially, you're minimizing the odds of that by taking away dice per attack action. That is really cool. And I call it the boring one because the other one is so overbounds awesome that I just love it. And that, I'm just going to go right back here to the screen. And that is going to be Shadowy Recall. It is also a triple. And Shadowy Recall is one of the coolest things about this faction. Pick a friendly fighter with the minion rune mark. Now I'm going to pause here. Everything except for the Thrall Master and the Luminate, your leader and the second in command person, they all have that minion rune mark, so you are all set. So literally, it's for everyone who's not in charge. That is within 12 inches of this fighter. That's a huge part of the board, given that Warcry's board size is so small. Remove that fighter from the battlefield and immediately set them up anywhere on the battlefield within a number of inches of this fighter equal to the value of this ability. So if you used a 333 on Shadowy Recall, you would put the fighter that you basically yo-yoed out within 3 inches of whoever's using it. That's amazing. That's amazing because it does still tie in with our discussion on board control. Think about this for a moment. If you have a unit and say your objective is to pick up an item, right? There's several of those objective cards where you have to basically be the one holding the MacGuffin at the end of the game. You're gonna throw somebody who's fast out there, right? They're gonna use abilities like the Acrobatic Leap. I almost called it the Lunging Leap. The Acrobatic Leap to get over enemies. They can grab that objective, and then you can yo-yo them all the way back to your side of the board. Again, 12 inches, it's not big in Age of Sigmar. It's monumental in Warcry when the board is only 30 by 22. And I think that's really incredible. Now, this can be used a multitude of ways. Just to kind of throw some ideas out there, I listed off some. You can use Shadowy Recall for yo-yoing to pull items and objectives towards you, of course. If you are in a combat that you think your fighter is going to lose, like let's say he gets in a combat with like 2 or 3 enemy fighters, you don't have to let them die. You can just pull them out of combat. You don't have to use a disengage action, which is important. And that's really cool because that now that fighter that you had is free to do whatever. Also keep in mind with the wording, it doesn't say that you cannot put them within attack range of a fighter. So that means, sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. If the Thrall Master somehow gets into combat that he doesn't feel good about, he can pull another fighter within 12 inches to him, because even if you roll triple ones, you'll still be able to put him within 1 inch of the Thrall Master, and then now you have the Thrall Master plus whoever you yo-yoed back attacking the enemy. And so you can really manipulate this. Like I say, I call it a yo-yo, but at any time you can, I guess boomerang would probably be more appropriate in terms of you can spend your turns throwing fighters out there, and as long as you are very cautious about knowing what that 12-inch range is, you can pull them back. And because this is an ability, you can use it between actions, before actions, after actions, that kind of thing. So you could have your Thrall Master like move, and then yo-yo someone back, which means that functionally the range that you could potentially pull someone towards you is closer to, his movement is 5, so it's closer to, what is that, 10, 22 inches. It's the board. It's the board. So think about that for a sec. One thing that's interesting about this ability is it does something that I kind of struggled with understanding before, and that is it adds so much value to who gets priority. Most of the time when I play Warcry, to be honest with you, because I do a lot of melee factions like the Untamed Beasts or my Savage Orcs, all those kinds of things where all they want to do is run up and get into combat, and there's so many combats going on at once, I don't generally care who gets initiative, right? There were so many fights that I was going to take a punch somewhere, I don't really care if you go first. However, with Cypher Lords, because they will die very easily, and you do have access to abilities like this, you really will care about getting that priority, getting that initiative in the beginning, because if your turn starts and you have priority, now you have the opportunity to look at the board and be like, who do I need to pull out of combat? Who needs to be able to move over the enemy, using the Acrobatic Leap? It just opens up a lot of possibilities for you. Keep in mind that we're talking about the Thrall Master here, and you have to factor in, okay, wait, do I want to steal priority so that I can move the Thrall Master up and drop the Shattered Gloom Globe ability, so now that he has this aura of 6 inches of -1 attack? So there's a lot of things to consider here. Like I said, Cypher Lords, very board control heavy. You have to think about those things quite a bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and move into the next one, the Luminate, but you'll find there's some really cool stuff here as well. The Luminate, which is up here in the top right for our discussion here, she actually is rocking a pretty cool like spear glaive thing. Has a 2-inch range, which I think is highly important. Has 5 attacks, strength 4, okay, so we're looking just like the boss, and the base damage is 2, crits are 5. So a very capable fighter, much like our Thrall Master here. One thing that she does really well is that, she can also, if you didn't know, use the Shadowy Recall ability. So all the things that we just talked about with the Thrall Master, she can do that as well, obviously, except for the globe thing. She doesn't have that. But that means that you have now a leader who's good in combat, the Thrall Master, who can do the yo-yo trick, and then you have a slightly lighter, she's not quite as tanky as the Thrall Master, but you can be more aggressive with her because she's not your leader, and you can use her to do yo-yo tricks as well, just the exact same. Now the reason that's important is because you are going to be splitting your warband up into 3 different parts, the sword, shield, and dagger. And so if you split them and they come in on different parts of the board, you can functionally yo-yo anything, anywhere. Like it just magnifies that ability more and more. And so kind of keep that in mind. Now one thing I want to point on, specifically when it comes to the Luminate, and it'll also apply to all the units we talk afterwards, is that 2-inch ranged weapon. I don't think a lot of Warcry players really value 2-inch ranged weapons as much, but the truth is they are incredible, because that means I can attack you, but next time it goes around to attack you, next time it's your turn, if you want to hit me back and you have a 1-inch ranged weapon, well, you're out of range. You need to make a move action to come in base-to-base contact or within an inch of me to be able to swing. And what that does is it dramatically cuts down on action economy. And so having those longer range weapons just outside of 1 inch, just something that maybe your opponent doesn't have, is absolutely awesome. Now I'll admit, aside from that, there's not a whole lot that makes her super unique. If we look at her cardigan, that's the only icon she has. She has the Shadowy Recall, which is one heck of an ability. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. It's quite amazing. And I kind of view her as like a support character for the Thrall Master, being able to throw units across the board between each other, knowing where they need to be. And what that really does is it presents a lot of different threat across the board in terms of, okay, well, I know the Thrall Master can yo-yo people and he can pull folks back and put them on objectives and Acrobatic Leap. But the second you introduce a second unit that can do that, things get really, really complicated when it comes to your opponent as far as playing to the objectives, where we need to be, what we need to pick up, all those kinds of things. These guys excel. Now the next up are we have 3 Mirror Blades and 3, what are they called, Mindbound. And these units are not terribly dissimilar from one another. The Mirror Blades are kind of a more elite version, slightly, and the Mindbound are your basic chumps that just pretty much just exist. All of them have the minion, or whatever it was, rune mark, so they can all be teleported around. And they all have very similar stat lines, so we'll just take a look here. So we have the 2 Mirror Blades on top, and then the Mindbound down below. And these come in 2 different flavors, but they are identical to each other unit by unit. So they can either have the Glaive, which is the 2-inch ranged weapon, or you can have 2 swords. What you're trading off really is that the longer ranged weapon has fewer attacks, but the swords have more. And so that's kind of what you're trading off. The spears get that 2-inch range, and that's really the strength of them. We'll talk about the Mirror Blades first here. The dueling swords are cheaper points wise, but they miss out on the extra inch of range to do all the cool things I was just talking about with the Luminate, about staying outside of combat of your opponent and making them make move actions to use up what they have. Now the Glaive, in addition to having longer range, they have a little bit less of attack. We'll go through the profiles here, but they also gain access to a unique ability, and that is Low Sweeping Blow. So it's a double. Roll 1 dice for each visible enemy fighter within 2 inches of this fighter. On a 4 to 5, allocate 1 damage point to the fighter being rolled for. On a 6, allocate a number of damage points equal to the value of this ability. Now what's interesting is that the Luminate, who also has a Glaive, does not have that ability. I don't know why that happened, but it did. I find it to be an interesting one. The truth is, I don't think it's that amazing of an ability. If you get some of these guys with Glaives, really stuck into a bunch of grots or something like that, and you want to apply damage to multiple places, or you're counting wounds, that kind of a thing, I can see uses for it, for sure. But I really think if you're going to purposefully buy the Glaives or build your guys with the Glaives, it's because you want that 2-inch range, right? That's really what it's about. Everything else is kind of secondary. Now, on the note of those abilities here, we'll just kind of compare what we have as far as the stuff goes. So we have the Spear, which is 2-inch ranged, 4 attacks, 4 strength, base damage is 2, crits are 5. That's awesome. And that matches the Luminate, which is great. I mean, the fact that your more elite troops can be a heavy hitter just like your second in command is sweet. And then the one with the blades, the 2 swords, have a 1-inch range, but they have 1 more attack, 5 attacks, strength 4, and their damages base 2, crits are 4. So a little bit less devastating on the crit there. For me personally, I decided to go with the Glaives. The range is really, really valuable. You won't always get a chance to use it. Like, your opponent will not always set up things to be perfectly, so you can just kind of poke them with a 2-inch long spear, and they won't be able to do anything against you. But the truth is, I find that there's a lot more utility in that than just having the swords. And last up are these 2 bottom profiles here. These are the Mindbound, and they are functionally like mini-me versions of the Mirror Blades. They have the same swords and glaive options, although the damage profile is a little bit different. We'll cover that. And if you take the glaive, you do also get that sweeping blow ability. And on him and on these guys, because they're so cheap, you can use them as sort of like little missiles, right? You'll just take when you're mindbound because you don't care about them, they're chumps, and you throw them forward, and you can use the glaive ability. And I think that adds a little bit of value to it, because you're not spending that much to be able to get minimal amounts of damage. I don't think that's a terrible value. For these guys, kind of just go whatever you want. I can see a lot of good arguments for just taking, when it comes specifically to the mindbound, just taking whatever's cheapest, because you just want to fill up bodies and have action economy and that kind of stuff. So I can definitely see a good reason for taking the guys with swords, because if we look here, even though they have the same weapons and access to the same abilities, they are a little bit different. So the Glaive one, range 2, 3 attacks, strength 3, so we took a hit there, that's a big deal. And then their damage is base 1, crits are 4, so that's not exciting, I'm not gonna lie to you. And that's why, because they're not gonna do much damage anyway, that's why I say, like, you know, if you were interested in doing like a little missile, having them run forward, do their low sweeping blow attacks, and then yo-yo them back, or press on to an objective, that makes more sense to me. Now, as far as the double blade one, you got range 1, 4 attacks to get 1 more attack, strength 3 again, and the damage is base 1, crits are 3. So after having looked at all the units here, what can we walk away with, right? Who's the MVP of this thing? I think it's pretty obvious. The Thrall Master with the Luminate in a close second place. He defines the faction, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. Those two characters, the Thrall Master and the Luminate, define this army because they set the tone for what it's good at, which is movement, board control, I guess deception, in the sense of, you know, you can send forces to go kill this guy over here, and then he pulls them away. All of a sudden, you've wasted time going in the wrong direction. All those kinds of things. I can see this being an extremely difficult faction to learn, simply because it requires you to play to the objectives and to know what those are and be very familiar with them. Nothing here hits like a truck, right? There's no massive damage sweeping things going on. Instead, what you get is a whole lot of mobility, and mobility that is more than just bonus move actions. There are other factions, of course, that have access to bonus move actions here and there, but I'm talking about motion in the sense of free disengage actions. You can throw them into combat with somebody, like if you're Thrall Master, pull someone to join him in combat. That's really stinking cool. A big downside to this faction, though, is that there really isn't any ranged damage options. Yes, you have the ability to throw the star within 6 inches, but it only does anything on a 4-up, and even when it hits a 6, it depends on the double you use to achieve it. The truth is, I really think that you're not going to use that one hardly ever, because you would rather use that double for things like Acrobatic Leap, just as one example. If I was going to start using this faction, which I do plan to do when I'm playing against friends here locally, what I would probably do is turn 1, spread out towards the objective, and bank that wild die. Because the second turn, I think, is where you're going to see the most important actions being made. Second and third turns, where you want to use those triples like to the maximum that you can, and start pulling and yo-yoing and using the globe to negate attacks on your opponent, that kind of thing. And so I would definitely say round 1, bank your die, because at that point it doesn't really matter who goes first. No one's engaged in combat or whatever. So spread out whatever the objective is. I think this warband will really excel at objectives that are when you have to get an item, right? You have to pick up the loot bag or whatever it is, because they can take it and then run or move and yo-yo or whatever you want to do. They're going to struggle on kill missions, okay? And so say the objective is to wipe out your opponent's dagger. Everything in your army, in this little warband here, needs to be dedicated to moving in that direction, and like that direction only. The only time someone should be moving towards literally anything else is if you're going to basically sacrifice that warrior to, like, you know, hold off the enemy a little bit. Because honestly, because things are not super killy, you need to devote as much as you can to wiping out whatever the objective is as possible, right? So if it's the dagger, your entire army needs to be focused on killing that guy's dagger. That's just the way it is. And that's the one I think they'll struggle with. And when I hear complaints about, like, oh, I'm really struggling to learn the Cypher Lords, I think that typically is what it is. Like, a lot of folks will just try and run forward almost like they were playing Untamed Beasts, and they get clobbered. And that is why, because they don't stand toe-to-toe in melee combat with a lot of other things. Instead, you have to play to the objectives, and specifically objectives where you have to be at a location or pick up an item are ones that they're going to be good at. The thing is, with a lot of these Chaos Warbands, there are built-in like baked in, deeply baked in, things that they excel at and things that they don't. For example, if you're playing a board that has no terrain, the Corvus Cabal is a sad, sad warband, because so many of their abilities and that kind of thing rely on, you know, moving through vertical terrain, coming down 3 inches from platforms, things like that. In the same sense, the Corvus Cabal the Cypher Lords really do excel at gameplay when it comes to objectives and grabbing things, not so much on the basic killing. And so that's something you have to keep in mind. What I'd love is if you are a Cypher Lords player, in the comments down below, let me know, do you buy more than one of these boxes to build out a warband? I know that you can play an entire game with just the contents of one box, but the more you buy, the more options that you gain access to, and I'd love to know what kind of lists you are running, and what is your favorite moment when it comes to the Shadowy Recall ability? This is something that existed in War Machine and Hordes back when I played that with one of the factions. It could teleport units around, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I thought it was the coolest thinking thing. That was my faction, Circle of Ouroboros. So I loved it there. And it's something I'm excited to try in Warcry with a much smaller board size and more compact units, things like that. I'd love to know, what's your best story when it comes to Shadowy Recall? Thank you all so much. In the comments below, tell me what faction you'd like covered next, and we'll get right to it. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.